It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right. Good morning, America. We are in our third segment this morning. As you know, we broadcast every morning from 8 a.m. onward, typically till about 9:45. We broadcast our show live on americasvoicenow.org, and we also stream it via audio and video there. But we also stream it on audio at another great website I'd like you to visit, which is Patriot FB. Patriot FB. Patriot FB is an outstanding location that is a site where you can go and essentially have an alternative to Facebook. If you're not aware, Facebook is laden with censorship. They cut stories off the stuff that I put up all the time. In fact, YouTube does it too. Why do you think some of these videos? Yesterday I posted videos that have 0 views. How can that be? I've never had that before. Facebook and YouTube, these companies are determined to keep silent in the face of, or to keep you uninformed in the face of their tyranny and their support of what's happening and what's wrong with our nation. Patriot FB gives you an alternative to that. In fact, I'm not the only program that streams live on there. I'm there from 8 in the morning till about 9:45. Then there's a program on from 10 o'clock, Resurrect the Republic. That's an excellent program as well, and I encourage you to go visit there and listen to that. You can get to any of these, by the way, by going to patriotfb.com/radio, and you can just listen anytime you want. That you can do it on your cell phone. You can do it however you like. We also have J.J. McCartney, who comes on from 2 to 4. And J.J. has a patriot's heart and a Christian's heart, and he is he's an outstanding guy. By the way, a 30-year history in radio. I mean, the guy's got, the guy's been in radio for forever. There is music that plays in between these programs. On Tuesday nights, Cowboy Logic comes on with Donna Fiducia. And then every night from 9 till midnight comes the Midnight Patriot. That's with Jeff Norton. These are all patriotic radio programs, and we encourage you to participate in them because you're getting an alternative media view that you're not going to get anywhere else. What we're seeing everywhere else in the mainstream media is just lies and misdirection and manipulation and propaganda. We're trying to give you the truth about what's happening there. So we encourage you to to participate with us on Patriot FB if there's any way that you can. Sign up there. They do have high security, by the way, so if you get knocked out of there on a security issue, just send an email to Jeff Norton. I think it's Jeff Norton at themidnightpatriot.com, and that way you can at least, he'll be able to clear you to get in. The security is tight because there's so many trolls that jump on there and try to throw, broomsticks into the spokes. It's amazing to me. These people, either they have nothing else to do or they're paid. I don't get it. But you won't experience some of the same stuff that's going on around the globe and around Facebook that you on Patriot FB. So anyhow, by the way, there's a friend of mine who runs a farm site there, and it's called theheritagehills.com. Dan is a buddy of mine, and he listens on Patriot FB. You can get to his website by going to theheritagehills.com. And he sells, beef and meat products that are all natural, 100%. If you ever have an opportunity to call him, you can also reach him via phone at 417-231-4902. And he also has a website called survivalbypreparedness.com. Survivalbypreparedness.com. The idea of that site is that he's got some products on there that are for sale and stuff, but he also posts a lot of blog information up there. So great site for you to visit. Dan's a buddy. He's a good guy, and he's a patriot. So visit those two sites and help yourself out. By the way, on our website at americasvoicenow.org, on the upper left when you first get on there, there's a whole list of sites that we have supported and have links to, and some of those are some of the sources that we use every day. And so I encourage you to find out more about those sites and visit them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what happened yesterday or Monday, because China and Japan have sold off quite a bit of their treasury paper. Now, treasury paper, for the record, is the national debt of the United States. And some of it can be sold, some of it can't be sold. There is two different ways to look at treasury paper or the debt of the United States. Some of it can be sold in the public arena, and some cannot. But in this case, China and Japan, which are the two largest holders of U.S. debt, both offloaded quite a bit of paper. And it's interesting that as they're offloading that paper, the nation of Belgium, which, for the record, Belgium is the heart of the Euro, the Eurozone. Belgium is the heart of the Eurozone, excuse me. And they stepped in and bought an enormous amount of this debt that China was and Japan were releasing. So the question is, why was that? Well, the truth is that China is doing two different things simultaneously. One, they are attempting to reduce their holdings of American debt while simultaneously boosting the value of their own currency and trying to simultaneously promote the yuan as the new world's reserve currency, replacing the dollar, right? Bear in mind that if they're successful at that, then all their holdings of U.S. money become, for all intents and purposes, much less valuable, right? If they reduce, if the yuan were to replace, as an example, the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, suddenly the value of the dollar would drop, and that means that all the $1.3 trillion of debt that they hold would drop significantly as well. What's interesting is, and Zero Hedge has this article out there, it's linked on our site and so forth. It says this happened at a time when Chinese FX reserves, that's Forex, currency conversion and currency trading, reserves soared to all-time highs, and when China had gobs of spare cash lying around and was not investing in U.S. paper, which should be quite troubling to anyone who follows the nuanced game theory between the U.S. and its largest external creditor, and the signals that China sends to the world when it comes to its confidence in the United States. What is truly surprising is that despite the plunge in Chinese holdings and Japanese holdings, which also dropped by $4 billion in December, total foreign holdings of U.S. Treasuries increased in December by one country, Belgium. Now, the truth is, Belgium is the European titular leader of the Eurozone. That's where all of that is. That's where the Eurozone's parliament is held and all the rest of that. And they have an enormous amount of their own debt that they're in trouble with. I mean, you've got countries like Greece and like Spain and like Italy and Ireland and all these nations that are in, massive financial trouble, right? Let's not forget that Greece is in the worst depression they've had in God only knows how long, maybe ever. That in Cyprus, they actually went and skimmed the top of all the bank accounts and took the money from private investors and said, have a nice day, we just needed this, right? So what are they doing buying U.S. debt when they've got massive amounts of their, and Germany is the only really stable government within the organization economically wise, and they are frankly at the point where they're tired of having to bail out all these other countries. And so what they do is impose these draconian austerity programs on these countries that they say, okay, we'll bail you out, but for all intents and purposes, you've got to follow our mandates and our dictates on how you're going to move forward. And that's where all the conflict comes from in Greece. Germany says, if you want our money, you're going to have to do it our way, and you're going to have to run your country our way. And of course, the Greeks are, and by the way, for the record, in Greece, if you were look at that society, which relies very, very, very heavily on government handouts and dependency, you can see the future of the United States. I mean, people in Greece retire at 50. They get government pensions. For all intents and purposes, they can claim disability for almost anything. In fact, folks, pedophilia is a reason for disability in Greece, and you actually get a government pension check as a result of that. That's you get a disability payment for being a pedophile, for being a thief. That's right, being a thief entitles you to a disability payment from the government in Greece. So, when we look at the concept of how the United States is mirroring some of that with our dependency on food stamps and our dependency on welfare and our dependency on disability, especially disability, you got to wonder, are we not following down a path which obviously leads to ruin? The answer is yes. The question is, why? Well, I want you to take a look at Venezuela. In the news this morning, there is, now Venezuela, if you're not familiar, just so I'll bring you up to speed real quick, Chavez was the guy in power over there. He was a dictator there. He died. He got sick, and he was replaced by his kind of handpicked leader, if you will. Well, yesterday, the leader of the Venezuelan opposition was actually arrested, and he turned himself in because they demanded that he do so. But he was arrested, and their protesters are, they're in this major upheaval. And the truth is that the real problem that they have at this stage in the game is Maduro, who's the president of Venezuela right at the moment. Sorry, I'm doing too many things at once. He is, for all intents and purposes, the entire nation is dependent on the government for almost all of its basic needs. As an example, they have shortages of the most basic necessities down there, like toilet paper, and they have these rolling blackouts that roll through the entire nation. And the successor to Chavez, Maduro, he is cracking down across the board on anyone who steps up to disagree. He doesn't have Chavez's military connection. And so I want you to watch Venezuela, because there's some similarities and some synchronicity between their situation and ours. I'm going to tell you what it is right now. Chavez came from the military, and so he was kind of a military leader, if you will, during his reign. He got cancer and died. Maduro is not. And as a result, he comes from outside the military, and the military down there is kept in line and kept loyal to the government by allowing them to be involved in the cocaine distribution business. I mean, let's just call it what it is, right? They're part of the cocaine distribution market down there. Well, here's the problem. If Maduro can't hang on to that connection between the military and the federal government, then it could well be what we saw over in Egypt, where the military says, we don't have a connection to you, we don't owe you any loyalty, and frankly, we can do the job better ourselves, and you're out of there. The problem is that the military is being called on as these protests are raised, and as the situation becomes more dire, they're going to be called upon to strong-arm the general population. And that's the correlation what we're seeing with the United States. When we're talking about the risk of how will the military respond against their own civilians, this is the kind of thing that we are looking at in the United States as a risk, right? I mean, how many times have we heard that, right now military leadership in the United States is being asked to commit to how they will handle the things like, will you disarm Americans? Will you fire upon Americans? In fact, we've had 200 or so military officers, flag officers on down, who have been relieved of command or retired out or removed out or whatever, pushed out, because they have not acquiesced to those requests. And I don't think those requests started only or exclusively with Obama. This is, the end of a long line of treasonous tyrants, and Bush and before him, and Clinton before that, and Bush the senior. And listen, that goes back decades, folks. But the point is that when you're sitting here and you're looking at the Arab Spring that we saw over in Egypt, where the people, went in a massive display of solidarity. I mean, you had 33 million people out of 84 million or 85 million who actually went and demanded that the government quit and leave, the Muslim Brotherhood. And they were successful to the extent that they got them out of there. The problem is that they didn't have an interim government to put it in its place. The same problem exists in Venezuela, but they don't know that the military is either going to come to their rescue or not. And it's a problem. The one difference that they have is in Venezuela is that they have a very, very strong petroleum industry, and that is what keeps their unions in power, and that's basically what provides the government with money. Venezuela is an oil-rich country. And even though Egypt theoretically could be, I suppose, their infrastructure is so mangled up at this point that they really can't utilize that. What I guess my point is that we're seeing this kind and this level of disruption around the world, because people everywhere are seeing the oppressiveness of what our governments are doing to us. It's the same fight going on in the Ukraine, folks. In the Ukraine, the president there was told to join the Eurozone and the European Union, and instead of doing that, he simply said, no, I'm going to side and ally myself back with the Russian Federation again. And the people were like, no, that's not what we want. And he said, it doesn't really matter what you want, it matters what I want. And of course, he's a Putin puppet, so he went and tried to cut the deal anyway. In the Ukraine, these people are fighting in the streets over it. You don't hear a lot about, you see it as a blurb, quick run across the news or something like that, but nobody's looking at it in depth. Because all of these situations are just a mirror of what we're going through in our nation down in the future. In other words, is this what the United States will look like at some period in time in the future, in the near future? Our government clearly no longer represents us. They've become extraordinarily oppressive. They do things that are outside of our authority and permission, like the TPP, which is being negotiated in secret. It'll strip our nation of any sovereignty we have left. Our courts are corrupt. Our Congress is corrupt. Our president is not even a citizen. How the heck did we let that happen? Look at what's happening around you and recognize it for what it is. These situations, our debt, which is so massive, being bought by the European Union, those guys don't have two nickels to rub together. They don't have a window to open or well, all right, I'll leave that analogy alone. But look, when China is dumping our debt and Japan is pushing our debt down and the Eurozone is picking it up, that should be an indicator that this bubble of a financial system that we keep playing with is really not as solid as those people would give you. And in fact, I read an article the other day about George Soros and how he's hedging his $11 billion investment fund against a U.S. collapse, economic collapse. These people, I guess their attitude is that they've got so much. They've got so much protection because they are completely encapsulated in their own bubbles. They're wealthy. They have already taken measures to protect themselves and their families. And at this point, they're playing with us like we're a bunch of pawns. And there's no real. It's almost like a kid with a video game. There's no real consequence for the death. I don't know. I see bad things on the horizon for us fiscally and economically. And when we look at some of the scenarios that are happening around the world about how the United States has lost, for all intents and purposes, all of its political strength, that none of this bodes well for us. I mean, we're basically stripping our own country of our resources and handing them off around the world. And it's not just Obama. Yeah, he's accelerated it, but he's not the only one responsible for it. NAFTA and CAFTA weren't signed by Obama. Those treaties have been in place for years and been acting as an intravenous drainage of our national resources for decades. I don't understand how people who allege that they represent a nation can be so destructive of that which they claim to. I don't know. I'm so discouraged about the state of where we stand as a nation and how we're going to move forward to resolve that. I don't know. I don't see anything good on the horizon here for a resolution. At least not a peaceful one that is going to be beneficial to the rank and file members of the country. I just think the elitists have made a determination that they're going to have this global governance no matter what, one way or the other, and we're all going to have to live with it or suffer the consequences of fighting against it. It seems pretty plain to me. Okay, you're listening to America's Voice Now. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to hit on our final topic, which is who really represents and presents the greatest threat to America. And the reason I threw that one out there is because I think you're going to look at it internally as the greatest threat to America is not terrorism from externally or anything along those lines. The greatest threat to America is actually right here from our own internal government. When I talk about that, I'm going to talk about the police state that we've been developing and building. How, I mean, people left and right. I mean, we've had more people killed by those people sworn to protect and serve than we lost in Iraq. Something's wrong with that, folks. When when murder at the hands of law enforcement becomes a national epidemic, and we've got a government that utilizes false flags to drive us one way or another, there's something desperately wrong with that. And I don't know whether people don't see it or they just want to continue to just hide their eyes and pretend it's really not happening. But it is happening. Who really presents the greatest threat? Even public polls say it's our own government, ladies and gentlemen. All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial spots on radio. When we come back, we'll try to tackle this topic. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can email me, and I'd like to hear from you. I want to hear feedback from our listenership. You can send me email to Mike at americasvoicenow.org. That's Mike at americasvoicenow.org. Make sure that you utilize our listen line at 415-325-0725. You can call in and listen to the program at your leisure. Using any standard telephone, you'll get the particular episode for that day. We'll be right back.